we get in his truck and we go, we're not doing this. This is bullshit. And he says, I have some acid. Let's take some acid. And I said, okay, cool. Let's do that. So we take some acid and he goes, oh, by the way, I have to stop at the local community college to register for classes. And I'm saying, wait, what do you, I have a mind full of LSD and we're not going to go to a place to, wait, what are you talking about? So we drive to Pasadena City College and he's standing in line to register for classes and the walls are melting and I'm freaking out. And we get through that experience and we go to Hollywood and we park just coincidentally in front of the Directors Guild of America. And we get out of the car and the building is speaking to me, right? Like the building is literally like forming eyes and it's talking to me in some kind of weird emotional language. And I was like, oh my God, I think there's something here.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com.
With RX bars, what you see is what you get. But since you can't see one right now, enjoy this vivid description. 12 grams of protein made from real, simple food. Then sprinkle sea salt crystals on top of decadent chocolate. And that's a chocolate sea salt RX bar. Now picture yourself going to rxbar.com to see all our other protein bar flavors. RX Bar. Simple. Good.
With the Home Depot, browse thousands of online decor product options on homedepot.com/decor. Thousands of furniture pieces and decorative accents to fit any style. Explore bedding and bath linens, kitchenware, and small appliances all at the right prices. There's free delivery on select items $45 or more, and now for a limited time, you get 10% off the styles you love when you use the code UNMISTAKABLE10 at checkout. Valid on select items online only. Exactly what you're looking for and more at homedepot.com/decor. Patrick, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure to have you here. So I actually was introduced to you by way of our mutual friend, Akira Chan, who was an amazing human being. He told me about the work that you've done in film and the work that you've done on Finding Joe, all of which we will get into. But I want to start with what I think is a very relevant question, given the nature of your work and the film that you just did. And that is, what religious or spiritual beliefs were you brought up with, and how did that end up impacting your life?
Oh, that's a really good question. I was brought up by a physicist. My father is a scientist, and my mother, who is my father is of German descent. He's Caucasian, and my mother is Japanese, and she was an artist. And neither one of them had religious or spiritual practices. In fact, my father was militantly atheist. But they're I don't know how to describe it. Their ethos is really what rubbed off on me. So, but my father being a scientist and my mother being an artist was really what shaped my spiritual beliefs, actually.
So, one, how did that impact you later in adult life? But more importantly, like you have, a Japanese mother, German father. Like, what parts of their culture did they infuse in you growing up? And what parts of it did they have to let go of, and like what parts of it did you fight? Because I mean, to some degree, you've kind of had the experience of growing up with an immigrant parent.
Oh yeah, I would say that's a good question. It's all over the map, actually. So earlier in life, I really struggled with my mother being Japanese, and we were picked on quite a bit, racially because of that, and that defined me quite a bit. Actually, those incidences, those traumatic experiences in life, after having done some deep work around those, really defined who I was. It controlled my behaviors in many ways. Sometimes for the good, but it really made me strive to be an overachiever to compensate for that. So in some ways it worked out well, but I was carrying around a lot of baggage as a result of it. And in later life, and it's really, really funny how it works out, right? It's ironic how the thing that you hated the most as your child was your greatest gift. And I feel like embracing that part of me, that part of my mother, which is very creative and Japanese, and she's an immigrant and had to fight for a lot. Embracing that is really now my greatest strength.
Yeah. Was your mother a typical sort of Asian parent? I mean, your dad being a scientist also. My dad's a scientist as well. He's a professor. I can tell you for damn sure the last thing on their minds was go do something creative as a career. And, you did. So did they have any particular career advice that was sort of standard?
Yeah, definitely the same thing. So my father was grooming me at an early age to become a scientist. And I just kept gravitating towards things that were more creative. And my mother was really encouraging me to do, whatever I wanted. But at some point, they were both pretty checked out in my high school years. So I was kind of left to my own. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I just always gravitated toward anything creative. So I really tried to stick with that. And for him, he didn't mind it, but he didn't like it either.
Mm. Why do you think that is? Because I don't think my dad minds it, but I think it's not that he doesn't like it. I think he just doesn't get it.
Yeah, he didn't. I think later in life he got it, but early on he saw the path to success as his own path to success, which is you go to college, you get a degree, and you find some success in whatever field that is. And that was the path that he took. And so he just projected that on me.
Mm. Do you have siblings? And if so, did their career trajectories turn out really differently? Did your parents give them different advice?
No, my brother, he works in IT. He manages pretty big, what do you call them? I don't even know what you call them, memory banks, right? So Apple and Google and all the big companies have run these giant memory farms, and he manages those.
Mm. So what in the world led you into filmmaking? Because one thing that I think is fascinating about the sort of creative path, right? Particularly whether it's doing, what I've done as an author, whether it's what you do as a filmmaker, is unlike, sort of becoming a doctor, the steps aren't clearly laid out in front of you. It's like, well, you could take this class or do this major. It might lead you there or it might lead you nowhere. It's like, the film school grad who becomes an investment banker or vice versa. What happened that led you to where you're at today?
It's an interesting origin story. So a combination of things. One is I knew I was creative. Two is the work of Joseph Campbell, and three is LSD. So, so just to mix that all up, right? On my I had heard about Joseph Campbell through a teacher. Right. But really not so much more than the phrase follow your bliss. Mm-hmm. And during my high school graduation, instead of going to graduation, my friend and I decided it would be a good idea to drop LSD and drive around Hollywood.
Okay. You got to tell us about that whole thing in much more detail.
Okay. So basically we get in his truck and we go, we're not doing this. This is bullshit. And he says, I have some acid. Let's take some acid. And I said, okay, cool. Let's do that. So we take some acid and he goes, oh, by the way, I have to stop at the local community college to register for classes. And I'm saying, wait, what do you, I have a mind full of LSD and we're not going to go to a place to, wait, what are you talking about? So we drive to Pasadena City College and he's standing in line to register for classes and the walls are melting and I'm freaking out. And we get through that experience and we go to Hollywood and we park just coincidentally in front of the Directors Guild of America. And we get out of the car and the building is speaking to me, right? Like the building is literally like forming eyes and it's talking to me in some kind of weird emotional language. And I was like, oh my God, I think there's something here. And then I woke up the next morning and in my back pocket, I must have pulled a flyer off the wall because there was a flyer that said make movies this summer. And it was a flyer for a filmmaking class over the summer. And so I went, oh my God, this is like a sign. And I took that filmmaking class. And also at the same time was Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers, that interview came out. And it was kind of right then and there that I went, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm a filmmaker. That's what I do. That's what I'm going to do. This is it. Yeah. And that was in like, the mid 80s. And and that's where I've been ever since. It's been really amazing.
Why do you think that you discovered that so early in life, and so many people don't? And do you think it takes LSD for us to come to these kinds of realizations?
I was just going to say, everybody needs to take LSD at an early age. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that.
I'm sure the parents listeing are like thrilled that now we're encouraging drug use.
Don't do that. Or do that. It doesn't really matter. I feel like I actually don't know, but I did know that I've always had there's been something very burning me that's creative. Like if it wasn't filmmaking, it would have been something else creative. It just feels like I knew at an early age that I was meant to do something in the creative field. I just didn't know what it was. And when I came across the idea of filmmaking, it blended all these things together, music and art and film and storytelling. And it was it just spoke to me in a way that it was too powerful to not say yes to, right?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, like, I've been doing a lot of research, both, from reading as well as experimenting on psychedelics, just, to understand, why they produce these sort of states of consciousness. And I think that, the narrative around psychedelics has changed fundamentally over the last probably year or two, particularly with, Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, the work that people like Stephen Kotler are doing, at the Flow Research Collective in terms of accessing these higher states of consciousness. Like, why is it that we have to be able to reach, these higher states of consciousness for breakthroughs like the one you had? And even as a writer, I know for a fact that there's a big difference between sitting down to work on a task, in a sort of mundane thing, or one where I'm totally in flow and I'm just in the zone for 3 hours. The work that comes out is very different. Why is that? I
feel like it's because it's like when you walk around in reality, you're in the forest. But when you have those moments of peak experience, you are above the trees and your perspective shifts, and therefore you can put creative dots and connect them differently than you would if you were in the forest.
Yeah. We're joking earlier about the idea of, encouraging kids to try LSD at an early age. And you're like, no, don't do that. So I wonder, are you a parent yourself?
I am a parent myself. My kid is turning 21 next week, and he goes to school in Santa Cruz.
Okay. I wonder, what would your reaction be to your kid trying LSD? Like, how would you react?
Actually, to be honest with you, I've encouraged him to do so.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Can you expand on that for parents who are listening who are like, what the hell?
Because I feel like it has to do with your personal experience, right? So for one parent, it may be like, what the hell? Because that's based on their personal experience.
Yeah.
But because of my personal experience, I feel like it was mandatory, right? It really, just like you said, it gives you these peak experiences and allows you to see reality in a different way.
Yeah.
Most of the time, in fact, in my case, every single time I've done it, I've come away with something beneficial. Mm-hmm. So I feel like as a parent, you share your wins and your experiences with your child. The things that worked for you, like going to college, getting a degree, for some parents, you try to put that on your kid. Yeah. For me, I feel that it's not everything, but that's one component of my life that I feel like he would benefit from. And we have special circumstances. So I lost my wife to cancer, his mother, 2 years ago. Mm. So his college experience has been marred by that. In fact, his high school experience has been marred by her battle with cancer, which was 4 years. So his entire high school experience was also dealing with his mother struggling with cancer. Wow. So, that also was a contributing factor to that decision. I feel like, and he, by the way, he has subsequently experimented with those things and giving me nothing but positive feedback. Like, oh my God, I'm really glad I did that, and I had some remarkable insights. Hmm.
It's time to upgrade to Awara, the organic luxury hybrid mattress made with natural foam and New Zealand wool fibre for maximum comfort and cooling. Rest easy knowing that every time you choose Awara, 10 trees will be planted to restore forests in Africa, and fruit trees will be donated to help local farmers get on the path to food security and financial stability. With free shipping and returns, plus a forever warranty, you can't go wrong. AWARA sleep.com and use code HEALTH for $350 off. Plus, we will plant 100 trees with your purchase.
So if you're anything like me, you probably think of the Home Depot as a place for tackling intimidating home improvement projects, which might accidentally cause you to bulldoze the walls in your home while trying to do something as simple as hanging a picture or setting your home on fire with power tools. Yes, believe it or not, some of these things have happened to me. But there's another side of the Home Depot that might not make you as insane. The Home Depot now offers thousands of online decor product options on homedepot.com/decor. Browse thousands of furniture pieces and decorative accents to fit any style. Explore bedding and bath linens, kitchenware, and small appliances, all at the right prices. I recently restocked my kitchen with drinking glasses, cereal bowls, and other items that have made our kitchen a bit more delightful. So, whether you're going for a brand new look or a seasonal refresh, or simply a few finishing touches, the Home Depot has all the pieces you need. There's free delivery on select items $45 or more. And now, for a limited time, you get 10% off the styles you love when you use the code Unmistakable10 at checkout. Valid on select items online only. Exactly what you're looking for and more at homedepot.com/decor. For you, what decisions did you make about how you were going to live your life going forward based on having lost your wife?
I feel like number one is that we were married for 25 years, and she was just an amazing human being. And I try to take the best parts of her and incorporate that into myself. I intentionally took her strengths and try to use them in my daily life as a practice. And then, yeah, I think beyond that, it's difficult because it's still raw for me. So I try to make that a practice, but other than that, it's still very raw. And, I still miss her quite a bit.
Yeah. And, feel free to say no, like if I ask this question, we can edit it out. But I mean, how does it change your vision for your future? And if you're not comfortable answering,
I'm totally comfortable telling you this, and it relates back to the movie that I made, Finding Joe, is that it really shines a light and pulls into sharp relief your own mortality and the fact that you have very little time on this planet. And so, as a direct result of her passing, I think I've also said to myself, in fact, I know I have very consciously, there's only so much time. What do you want to do? Let's get that done, period. Whatever it is, there's no excuse. There's no tomorrow. Get out of bed every day and pursue that thing until you die, because someday you'll be dead.
So what's funny is, you and I can have this conversation. People can listen to it. We can go read books like Bronnie Ware's Regrets of the Dying. We can watch movies. And I think that there's a huge difference between understanding something like this intellectually and understanding it in the way that you have emotionally, because you're a person who's much more likely to take action on it. Whereas for so many of us, those things are just platitudes. How do you bridge that gap?
It's true. I don't think there's bridging that gap for most people. I think there is no bridging that gap. If you can't experience it in a way that's experiential, like if you don't actually experience it as opposed to intellectualizing it, your behavior is not going to shift, or it may for some people, it actually may. But I would say for the vast majority of people, you need those experiences, which is why alcoholics need to hit rock bottom before something happens, right? You need that experience before you take action or it changes your behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's talk about Joseph Campbell. I just the other day on Sunday, I had a college student who emailed me saying that, he asked the question, how do you find the courage to pursue your ideas? And I thought, okay, well, let's talk about Joseph Campbell, because that probably is really a relevant question to the work of Campbell. I know that from, having read, The Writer's Journey, which is basically based on some of that, as well as A Hero with a Thousand Faces. But what led you to basically making a film about this?
Okay, so this film, I feel like, was made out of a couple different things, right? And I know I just spoke about my wife passing, so it's going to seem like I need to have tragedies in my life to do anything. But the film was really born out of a crisis that I was having. So I was in the middle of a very embarrassing and classic midlife crisis. Whatever you think an American midlife crisis is for a male, I was doing that. And then I was directing television commercials, and I was becoming quite successful and making a lot of money um, and having a lot of turmoil. Right then and there, both of my parents passed away within 2 weeks of each other.
Wow.
And that was really brutal. It was like crisis upon crisis upon crisis. And I had always been a fan of Campbell. And when, my early 20s, I really got into Campbell. I read everything that he published, and I read The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is a difficult read for me. I'm not a great reader. And it's written in this weird old English that
that I know. I've tried.
Thick language, right? So you read an entire paragraph, which is one sentence, and you went, wait, what did I just read?
Yeah.
Anyway, my point is that I just chewed up this material, and so it had stuck with me throughout my filmmaking career. And I always said in the back of my mind, I wanted to make this film. And so I decided then that now is a good time to make this film. It would probably be a good pathway. Like, you can imagine someone dropping a rope into a tunnel and climbing that rope out. And that's how I saw making this film. Like, I saw it as a journey that would take me out of my crisis. In addition, I always knew that there was a message in there that the world could use, right? His work is very difficult to understand. So as a filmmaker, I went, oh my God, I can take these ideas and simplify them and turn them into a film, and people will be able to relate to them better. So all these things happened, and I went, okay, now's the time to start this journey. I've been thinking about it forever, and let's do this. And so I just very consciously went, okay, I'm on this journey.
Yeah. So we'll get into Hero's journey in just a second, but I mean, having lost your wife, both your parents within 2 weeks of each other, how in the world does somebody find the resilience within themselves to get back up after such a difficult experience? And because I think that there are some people who react the way that you do, who channel that into something positive. This is the thing that I always said, is that you can let adversity either inform you or define you. And so many people let it define them in a way that becomes paralyzing.
Right. My son was a good example of that. He's a very young man and a very, and so he let that define him, and that was very difficult for him.
Mm-hmm. But what do you think it is that allows a person to bounce back the way that you have and still see hope in the midst of what clearly is an experience that I can't even fathom all those things happening at the same time?
Well, I would say that I don't know. I would say that really having, for my parents anyway, that happened a while ago too. So, it's not like they were all right on top of each other, but
right.
that happened, about 10 years ago, maybe more now, 11 years ago. What happened? I feel like it was horrible, but I had no choice, right? You just have some choices there. So you can roll over, right, and get steamrolled, mm-hmm. or you can get up and do something about it. And I don't know why, but I just chose to do something about it. I think also, it comes back to Campbell quite a bit, because his work was so inside of me, right? The hero's journey, and finding the courage to follow your bliss, and those messages were already in me. So that definitely helped.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the phases of a hero's journey, because I think, like you said, I think we can kind of look at each one of them on that sort of circle. And I know this because I've tried to read The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and I had the same experience you did. And I'm a good reader. Like, I read hundreds of books, and I was just like, all right, I can't do this. Right? I just didn't have the patience. I kept the book because I was like, you know what? I know I'm going to come back to this at some point.
I stopped recommending it to people for that reason, right? I always recommend the Bill Moyers book now because it's an easy read.
Okay, good to know. I'll get my hands on that. But let's talk about these phases. I think we kind of all sort of implicitly understand them. It's kind of funny because I think inherently I try to build that structure into every single interview that I do. It just somehow comes out. And so let's dissect that, and then explain to me kind of how you put it into a film.
Okay. How should I proceed?
I guess let's start at the beginning, because it's such a, like I said, it's such a complicated concept when you open the book, but you took it and put it into a film to make us understand it a bit better. So let's just start kind of, at sort of the core principles, and we can kind of dive into each one, and then I'll ask you whatever questions I have, because I think that each one of these things, I think that we can all tie it back to a life experience very easily.
Okay, so I'll start there, right? So I think for me, the great thing about Joseph Campbell's definition of the hero's journey is that although he studied stories and mythology and religion and really discovered this common pattern that the hero goes off on this journey and returns, and no matter what the time period or the culture is, the heroes seem to be taking the same journey. And that was very interesting to him. And what really caught me about it was he was not the first person to see that, but he was the first person to relate it to living a human life. And that to me just grabbed me. Yeah. Oh my God, you mean I'm a hero that's taking the same journey as Prometheus or any biblical story or Star Wars or you name the story, and I was all of a sudden seeing myself as the hero on that metaphorical journey. But in my real life, it's not a metaphor, it's my life. So I really just loved that idea. And it turns out to be true, right? Mm-hmm. It really turns out to be, especially when you are doing anything creative, or even not creative, just living your life, that you go through the stages that the heroes that you see on screen go through. And life is difficult, and you need to find the courage and the skills to overcome those difficulties, to discover greater powers in yourself.
So to me, I think one of the things that's interesting, when I've talked to people, I remember my friend Eric Wall, who's our guest here, he said, Soren Kierkegaard once said that, all change is preceded by crisis, which is a fitting thing to say considering the crisis that we're in right now. And I always wondered if that's the case and you don't have a crisis, what do you do? Because you're right. It seems like for some reason people get comfortable. And I've noticed that pretty unanimously across the board, it's either some sort of crazy inciting incident, some rock bottom moment, or something that really challenges somebody's life experience that causes them to make a massive shift. Is it possible to bring about those significant changes without the inciting incident?
Oh, we were just talking about this earlier. I personally think it is possible, but if you take a large group of people, a very small percentage will actually be able to do that on an intellectual level and just read a book and say, oh my God, I need to change my thoughts and my habits, and then just go do it.
Yeah.
That's very, very rare. In my experience, you really need to have what Campbell would call a wake-up call. Mm-hmm. Right? And so if the classic example is Star Wars, and in that scene where Luke actually decides, after having resisted, to go on this journey, he's got no choice. His village has been burned down and his caretakers have been murdered. Yeah. So what's he going to do now? He's got no choice. And life often acts like that.
Well, it's kind of funny because I think that there are, momentary wake-up calls that we all have, and often we ignore them. Like I can tell you the early part of my career, it's like getting fired from 3 jobs in a row at sales, you should think that, oh, this should be the wake-up call that maybe this isn't meant to be. You suck at this. And it took me another 7 years of repeating it, over and over to be like, wow, I really suck at this. Like, why is that? What causes people to ignore their wake-up call?
Right. That's a very good question too. And once again, I think that's very individualized. So for some people, they have a very sensitive wake-up call meter. Oh my God, that's a wake-up call. I better pay attention to that. And actually, as I'm talking, I realize that as you start going through those, as you start doing that, you get better at it. So your wake-up call meter gets better over time. Mm-hmm. You start to recognize over time things, potential crises as wake-up calls, and act on them. I think age does that to you as well. As you get older, you go, oh, right, this is the universe trying to tell me that I suck at this and move on to something else.
Yeah. Well, speaking of wake-up calls, let's talk about this whole idea in the context of what we're dealing with right now. A global pandemic is, as big a crisis as you could probably experience in a lifetime. And we're not experiencing it just individually. We're experiencing it, sort of as a collective. Right. And I'm curious, when you look at this through the lens of the work that you've done with Joseph Campbell, like, how do you think about that now? Like, what's the opportunity here?
That's another good one, because the opportunity here, right? So at first, during the pandemic, I really liked the opportunity that was presented that I saw that happening in my community, right? Which was people were reprioritizing. You couldn't go out, you couldn't go to your job. A lot of people just didn't have a job to go to, but they had to do something, right? To connect, to keep themselves busy. And so a lot of people are just going back to the basics, like connecting on Zoom with people that they just would never do that with. What's important to you, like reassessing your priorities was just a major thing. And I saw it happening in my neighborhood and in my community on a massive scale. And it was really amazing.
Right. But the funny thing is we're now, on the other side of that, you being in LA, where we've kind of hit a boiling point, where, like what we had hoped would be kind of, a reassessment of what matters. My roommate, one of my roommates, described this whole experience as a long overdue evolution in human consciousness. And yet the way we're coming out of this right now, at least at this moment while we're recording this, is almost terrifying to me. Like I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Right. So I went through the Rodney King riots here in Venice Beach.
Yeah.
And 2 days ago, I walked down, a block from my house, and I followed a group of protesters with my camera and shot some images that were pretty disturbing. I don't really have a conclusion for it yet. Like I don't want to start attaching meaning to it quite yet.
Sure.
But overall, it definitely felt like, oh my God, everyone's like reprioritizing, and now we're going, there's another crisis to distract us, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think maybe if you look back at history, at least recent history, we went through the 60s, which were even more violent than what's happening now, and everybody survived. But the question is, will there ever be a logical evolution in human consciousness? Maybe we're just, as a group anyway, destined to repeat history.
So this is something I've asked a handful of people, ranging from economists to social scientists. And, given your work, I want to ask you this. It's funny. I'm reading this book called The Molecule of More, which is about dopamine and all about the fact that human beings are just perpetually driven, to want more, to achieve more, to accomplish more.
Totally agree with that.
And so the one thing I wondered, is that, if you look at sort of nature, and I was telling a friend this, nature is a completely interdependent system where no part of nature necessarily prioritizes self-interest, because if it did, it would fall apart. It's not like the sun says, you know what, fuck you plants, I'm not coming out today. The sun comes out because the plants need the sun and we need the oxygen from the plants. Human beings are not like that. But yet the funny thing is, if we weren't driven by self-interest, we also wouldn't have accomplished so many of the things that we have.
Right.
And, I wonder, when you look at it through the lens of a hero's journey and the work that you've done with Joseph Campbell, like, do you think we prioritize self-interest to a point of diminishing returns?
Let's see. I think overall, humans have prioritized, as large groups, self-interest to the point of diminishing returns. Yes. But I also think that, you just said that nature, works like the sun just doesn't say fuck you. And it's as though that humans are separate from nature, right? But we're not, right? You're really part of it. And the illusion is, because you live in a city and you have a nuclear reactor that powers your city, that you're somehow different or above it, when in fact you're just part of it. And so all the turmoil that you see around you is maybe it's just part of the big dance.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk specifically about careers in the arts. I mean, you're in probably what is arguably one of the most difficult fields to actually make a name for yourself in and actually make any traction in. And I think that one thing that many aspiring artists have in their head is this sort of myth of the I've made it moment, that moment when they're going to feel as though they've arrived and that their work will be done and that, opportunity will flow. And I don't remember who it was. I think it was Sally Fields in her memoir. She said, there's no artist that's not afraid, no matter how successful they are, that all of it will come to an end. Which I think is a really bizarre sort of thing when you know that you've actually arrived at a certain point in your career where you're financially secure, like you have all these things. In your career, what is the poorest you ever remember being? Like, what was the most difficult time you remember going through in terms of the building process?
Let's see. The poorest time was of course, at the beginning, right, when I wanted to make films, but I didn't have the money to make them. And of course, I chose a very expensive art form, right? It's incredibly expensive to do. So I had all these ideas that I couldn't afford, and I really felt like there was this mountain that I would never climb. Like, oh my God, how am I going to get the money to do that? There's no possible way.
Yeah.
And so I walked around for about a year, just totally defeated. Like, this is just I don't know about this.
Hmm. How did you get over that feeling of being defeated? Because I think that I see that in so many people who are like, oh, I don't have the confidence to do this. I don't know what to do. You know, these are the things that I've just heard from my own readers.
I just kept plugging away.
Yeah.
I stopped trying to hit the home run and just started to hit like base hits, right? Okay, cool. Well, I have this 16 millimeter camera. What can I shoot? And then I just focused on what I could do and not what I wanted to do. And that A, made me happier, and B, allowed me to get these little hits and these little wins, and stacking those up. It took a lot more, it took a lot of time, but that just was way better. And even now I'm at a point where, so we're production is pretty much shut down because of COVID, right?
Yeah.
So what can I do, right? What can I shoot? And I'm kind of back to where I started. Like I have a camera, and I'm in the middle of a film. I've been making this film for the last year. And instead of going, okay, well, I'm just shut down here doing nothing, I'm trying to figure out what I can do. And there's a lot of things that I can do, that I can shoot, that I can produce right now, in service of the bigger picture, which is the film.
Yeah. I think I love the base hits versus home runs analogy, because I literally used that exact metaphor. I wrote this free ebook called Make More Art, a no bullshit guide to becoming a prolific creator. And I said, listen, the common pattern I found between everybody who is successful as a creative is that they just make a lot of stuff, and a lot of it is shit. And it's like, base hits versus home runs, because those home runs are so rare.
It is. And there's another thing to share right in that zone, which I'm just getting on board myself recently, and I'm really bummed that I didn't do this earlier in my career. And that is somebody said to me, a really good friend of mine said, listen, dude, done is better than perfect. Mm-hmm. And I've really been trying to take that to heart. Like you can just, as an artist, you can just spend days and weeks and months trying to make something perfect. And a lot of that has to do with your fears about how it's going to be perceived. Like, oh, well, if I don't make it perfect and I put it out there and people are going to laugh at it, when you see probably the best guys, they just make it and put it out there, right? It doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need to stress over it. Just get it done and put it out there and move on to the next one and build your skills and build your confidence that way.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I made my first documentary film sometime in December. I made a 10-minute, short, because I got the iPhone 11. It was the first time I was like, holy shit, I can make a documentary. And I took Ken Burns' documentary class, and I made a documentary about the women in my family and what amazing cooks they were.
No way. That's awesome.
I'll send it to you. But and I was like trying to find a theme. I was like, oh, they all cook with 0 recipes. That's it. So it's this little mini short called 0 recipes. And it was so much fun. And it was one of those things where I was like, yeah, I'm just trying to get as much done as I can. And, it was one of those things. I think there's also another part of this that it put me back in touch with something I had lost in the process of getting to do this for a living. And that was going back to doing it for fun.
Right.
And I wonder, like, when you get to where you're at, how do you find that balance between, like the work for its own sake versus doing the work for earning a living?
That's another good question. So there's two things there, right? One is, you want to try to align. I know it's out there. I know it's very difficult to do, but I was doing commercials for many years, and I really, really enjoyed it. So even if it was a crap commercial, I enjoyed the process of filmmaking so much that to me, it was kind of one and the same. Like I was making money and I was doing something I love, and I was always grateful for that. But now my career has shifted, right? I'm doing films now and 0 commercials, right? So it's difficult to make the money doing films. You have to spend a lot of money, not bring any income in for a year or more, and then sell that film. So it's a very feast and famine thing, and it gets very stressful. And right now, like just last week, there was a friend of mine who's a wardrobe stylist who said, hey, I need to shoot this fashion model and this line of clothing. And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I've been looking for. I'm going to do this for no money and for no other reason than the fun of it. And we just went down to Venice Beach, COVID safe, of course, and shot a bunch of incredible images of this dress and this little girl was wearing. And it was so much fun. And that got the juices flowing again. And I sat down and I wrote a bunch of new scenes for this film that I'm working on. And I would not have done that if I didn't take this creative pause and go do something just purely for the joy of doing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always find that some of my best ideas for my work that I get paid for comes from work that I do just for the sake of doing it, you know?
Yes.
Like when my roommate was like, why are you making this film? You're spending copious amounts of time on it. And I was like, just for fun. I said, tell you what, I was like, the crazy thing is I'm learning so much. And it's funny because I took 10 years of what I've learned from this show and applied it to something that had nothing to do with this, you know, from writing books and all that. And it was just a blast. I never had so much fun putting a project together.
It's really amazing how that works. I think it's good for anyone listening to this too, is to just maybe make it a practice or an exercise and say to yourself, okay, what is the little fun thing that I just want to do for nothing else but the fun of it? It brings me pure joy. I'm in my zone, and just spend a day or 2 days or a chunk of time, put it on the calendar and go do it. And I think what comes out of that is way greater than what you think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're from a world that predates social media. You know, where
thanks for outing me. Great.
No, I mean that as a compliment. I don't mean that. You know, you mentioned that you came up with the 80s. But the thing is, as somebody who basically built a creative career pre-social media, and you witnessed this, I think specifically related to what you say. You know, I remember I wrote an article on Medium titled "How the Death of the Influence" or "How the Birth of the Influencer Led to the Death of Hobbies." And you know, now we have this sort of idea that, you know, like what you're saying is, you know, oh yeah, if I do that, then I've got to put it on Instagram. And if I don't get 1,000 likes, it wasn't worth my time. Which is I think, an unfortunate byproduct of this.
That is, and I think that's a battle you have to fight within yourself, right? You have to, if we're doing what we just talked about, which is going and doing something for the pure joy of it. If you are doing it for the joy of it, and in the back of your mind, you're going, oh man, I'm going to put this on Instagram and I get more followers, then you're not really doing it for the joy of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you really have to watch that. That's like a self-monitoring thing. You have to know yourself well enough, or get in touch with yourself well enough to know your motivations, right? Are you doing this just for creative joy, or are you doing this for validation?
I love that. So speaking of which, you know, I wonder, you know, from where you were at when you were younger, when you started this journey to now, how has your definition of what it means to be successful as a creative changed?
When I was younger, I thought if I had a career that I could make a living on, right? If I could just make a living shooting film, then I would be successful. If I was a director, and I could, you know, have a family and pay my rent, that was success to me. My definition now, I haven't really taken the time to clearly define it in the way that I did back then. Like, I actually wrote that on a piece of paper. And I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I'm going to go and do this exercise.
I've been known to do that to people.
But my definition now would be something about impact, right? Like, I would love to have, in addition to being able to make a living on creating films, I would also very specifically want to have an inspirational impact on the viewer. Like, I want someone to watch my film and change their behavior. Like I love the fact that people watch Finding Joe and they go, oh my God, okay, a group of women watch Finding Joe, and they all, as a result of watching the film, as a direct result, took turns breaking up with their boyfriends, which they had been wanting to do for a long time. They watched my film and they took action, which to me, it seems like a good definition of a successful film.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that to me, I think probably my most rewarding thing is when somebody tells me that they've done something with the material here. That, like, to me is like, okay, that's real impact. We can measure. It's like, oh, I changed a job or did something because of something I heard one of your guests say. Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, right? It's one thing, and this goes back to what you were talking about earlier, the thing that you take action on is typically what you feel. And in those lines, like along those lines, film has the power to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if you've ever heard him. Like Sam Jones hosts the Off Camera podcast where he has.
I know Sam Jones well. He's a good friend.
Yeah, so like the people he brings in are just wonderful. But I think that one of the things I appreciate about film in particular as an art form is it gives us this opportunity to suspend disbelief completely and just travel into this other world where we can see ourselves in the characters. We can see things that aren't realistic in our normal lives.
Yes. Yeah. I really love that about film is that when you watch a film and you suspend disbelief, right, you're kind of at the mercy of the filmmaker. And as a filmmaker, you have the ability to shift, you just kind of reach inside someone and kind of shift their emotions around, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful, amazing. And I don't know, I really just love that aspect of filmmaking. When you're editing, especially, you're saying, how is the person watching this going to feel? And you just kind of ride that wave.
So on that note, I have a totally unrelated question about this. So, I'm, like a diehard Friday Night Lights fan. And what I wonder is what is it that causes like that combination of characters and emotional effect on a viewer? Because like I'll have friends who are like, oh, I don't like football. It's like, yeah, this show has nothing to do with football. Football is a backdrop. Even if you don't like football, you'll absolutely love this. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, I think that happens because of the hero's journey, man. We're all programmed. It's the same reason why some people love a film and some other people would hate that same film, right? You have like this key, there's like a lock in your mind, and certain keys will fit it and certain keys will don't. They hit those similar things the way that people grow up, right? You're touching the people's past in a similar way. I don't know. There's something just very powerful about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I can see why a career referred you. So I have one final question for you, which is how we finish all of our interviews at the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
Another good question. I think that to be unmistakable, you have to stand out from your background, whatever that is. So if you're a white dot on a blackboard, you're going to be unmistakable, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share your story and your wisdom with our listeners. Where can people find out more about you, your work, and everything that you're up to?
Right now, I just released Finding Joe on YouTube for free, and that seems to be a really good place to communicate with people. I'm also on Facebook, just Pat Solomon, and I'm on Instagram as Big Fat Donkey.
Wow. Well, I think that makes a perfect way to wrap the show. And everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.
Acast powers some of the world's best podcasts. Here's a show we recommend.
Secure, contain, protect. There are things that go bump in the night. Fantastic things, horrible things, redacted things. The SCP Archives is an immersive anthology fiction podcast that brings those strange things to life. Tune in every Tuesday on Acast or find us at scparchives.com.
Acast recommends.